My older brother micromanaged my meals throughout childhood. My parents spun it as letting the eldest lead. Now, they need financial help, and he's broke. So, I took the reins on my terms. I've been sitting on this for about 3 weeks now, and honestly, I don't know if I'm looking for validation, perspective, or both. Maybe I just need to get it out. So, here goes. My name is Cole, I'm 31, and I work as a budget analyst for our local government. Basically, I'm the guy who looks at departmental spending, flags overages, builds forecasts, and sometimes I have to be the bearer of bad news, telling people why they can't buy that fancy new copier when they've already burned through their quarterly budget. It's not a flashy job. No one at parties is ever impressed when I tell them what I do. But you know what? I'm damn good at it. I've been promoted twice in 6 years, and it pays well enough that I own a condo, drive a reasonable car, and, most importantly for this story, I actually have a savings account with money in it. Now, let me tell you about my brother, Graham. He's 35. Growing up, everyone in our family called him the king. And they weren't being sarcastic, they genuinely meant it. My parents, Ray and Donna, treated Graham like he was the firstborn son in some medieval succession plan. Whatever Graham wanted, Graham got. And this wasn't some subtle thing. It was deeply ingrained, like the operating system of our entire household. Here's how it worked. Almost every single night, my mom would ask Graham what he wanted for dinner. Not the family, just Graham. He'd usually say chicken tenders and fries. So, that's what we ate. If I dared to suggest something different, spaghetti, tacos, literally anything else, my mom would just say, Graham already picked, honey. For years, from about age 6 to 14, I ate so many chicken tenders and fries that, to this day, I can't even look at them without feeling a deep, quiet resentment. And yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous, but live it for 8 years, and tell me you wouldn't develop some complicated feelings about breaded poultry. It wasn't just food, though. Graham picked what we watched on TV. If I was already watching something, my show on the couch, totally invested, Graham could just walk in and change the channel. No discussion. If I protested, my dad would chime in with, let your brother watch what he wants, Cole. He's older. Graham got the bigger bedroom. Graham got the front seat in the car. Graham got first pick of everything at Christmas, even when the gifts were supposedly for both of us. One year, my grandma gave us a joint gift, a gaming console and 2 controllers. Graham immediately took the console to his room, and I was left with a controller and nothing to plug it into. When I asked my mom about it, she said, Graham's room is bigger. It makes sense for it to be in there. I asked, can I at least play it sometimes? She said, of course, just ask your brother. I asked Graham. He just said, no, my parents had this phrase they used constantly, letting the eldest lead. They said it like it was a profound parenting philosophy they'd read in some book. We believe in letting the eldest lead. It teaches responsibility. Except it didn't teach Graham responsibility. It taught Graham that the world revolved around him. And it taught me that my preferences didn't matter. I remember being maybe 9 or 10, asking my mom why Graham always got to choose dinner. She knelt down and said, when you're the older one, someday you'll understand. Which didn't even make sense. I was never going to be older than Graham. That's not how time works. But she said it with such conviction that I just nodded and went back to my room. That was the first time I remember thinking, okay, this is just how it is. Nobody's going to change this. I've got to work around it. Now, I want to be fair to my parents. They weren't cruel. They truly believed they were doing the right thing. My dad grew up in a house where the oldest kid had authority, and he just thought that's how families worked. My mom went along with it because, well, she went along with most of what my dad said. They're not villains. They're just people who picked a system that clearly had a winner and a loser, and they never once questioned which one I was. I could give you 100 examples, but I'll stick to the ones that hit the hardest. When Graham was 16, he got a car. Used, sure, but a car. When I turned 16, nothing. I asked about it, and my dad said, we can't afford 2 cars for 2 kids, Cole. Graham needs his for work. Graham worked part-time at a sporting goods store. I also had a job, bussing tables at a diner on weekends. But Graham needed the car. I rode my bike or got rides from friends. Then came college. Graham went to a 4-year university. My parents covered a significant chunk of his tuition, enough that he graduated with manageable debt. When I applied to schools, my dad sat me down and said, "We've used up most of what we set aside on Graham's education. You're going to need to figure a lot of this out yourself." What else was I going to say? I just said, okay. I went to community college for 2 years, transferred to a state school, worked 2 jobs the entire time, and graduated with a degree in accounting and public administration. I paid for almost all of it myself. I graduated with some loans, but nothing I couldn't handle. You want to know the kicker? At Graham's college graduation, my parents threw a big barbecue, invited the whole family. My uncle even brought a cake. My dad gave a heartfelt speech about how proud he was. At my graduation, my parents came to the ceremony, clapped, took a photo, and then we went to a chain restaurant. My mom said, "We're proud of you, Cole." And that was it. No barbecue, no speech, no cake. Just a photo and a plate of mozzarella sticks at a chain restaurant that I ended up paying for because nobody grabbed the check, and I didn't want to sit there awkwardly. Seriously. I paid for my own graduation dinner, after paying for my own education, after riding a bike, because my brother needed the car, while my parents threw a barbecue with a cake and a speech for Graham. That's not just favoritism, that's a caste system inside a house. They called it letting the eldest lead, but what it really was? A blank check for Graham and an empty plate for Cole. Graham was the king, crowned at birth, never earning it. And me? I'd been running the kingdom from the shadows without anyone even noticing. After college, I moved to a different city. Not far, about 2 hours, but far enough that I wasn't in Graham's orbit anymore. And honestly, that distance saved me, because once I was out of that house, I realized something that I think a lot of people in my situation figure out. I was actually pretty damn capable. Like, really capable. All those years of figuring things out on my own, budgeting my minimum wage paychecks, cooking my own meals because nobody was making what I wanted, fixing my bike because nobody was driving me anywhere, all of that turned into real-life skills. I knew how to manage money because I'd never had extra. I knew how to plan because nobody was planning for me. I knew how to be disciplined because discipline was the only thing I could control. I got my first real job at the municipal office about a year after graduation. Started as a junior analyst. Within 2 years, I was promoted. Within 4, I was handling the biggest departmental budgets in the office. My boss, a guy named Phil who's been doing this for 26 years, told me once that I had the best instincts for money of anyone he'd ever worked with. I didn't tell him that those instincts came from a childhood of watching resources flow to someone else and learning to survive on what was left. Meanwhile, Graham was living exactly how you'd expect someone to live when they've never been told no. He got a decent job out of college, a sales position at a company that sold industrial equipment. Made okay money. But Graham spent like he was still the king. New apartment in a trendy neighborhood. New car every 3 years. Fancy clothes, gadgets, meals out 5 nights a week. He had a girlfriend for a while, Natalie, who had similar spending habits. And together, they burned through money like it was a competitive sport. When Natalie left after 3 years, not relevant to this story, but she left, Graham's spending didn't slow down. It actually got worse. I think he was trying to fill some kind of void, but I'm not qualified to say that definitively. The point is, Graham was living large and saving nothing. And I knew this because my mom would occasionally mention it, in that worried but not doing anything about it voice she always used. She'd say things like, "Graham's been a little tight on money lately," or "Graham had to put some things on credit cards." I'd just nod and say nothing, because what was I supposed to say? I told you so? That's not my style. I just filed it away. I should mention, through all of this, my parents were still treating Graham like the king. When Graham needed a cosigner for his apartment, my dad signed. When Graham's car lease ended and he wanted a nicer one, my parents helped with the down payment. When Graham mentioned wanting to take a vacation to the Caribbean, my mom gave him $1,000 to help with the trip. Every time I heard about the stuff, I'd think, They covered half his college, they co-signed his apartment, they funded his vacations, and when I needed money for textbooks my sophomore year, my dad told me to check if the library had copies. I'm not saying this to sound bitter, okay? Maybe a little bitter, but mostly I'm saying it because the context really matters for what happened next. There was one moment that perfectly captures the whole dynamic. I was about 25, visiting for a holiday weekend. Graham was there, too. We were all sitting in the living room, and my dad asked what we should order for lunch. Graham, without hesitation, said, "Pizza, extra pepperoni." My dad picked up the phone and started ordering. I, perhaps foolishly, said, "Actually, could we get half with mushrooms? I don't really eat pepperoni anymore." Graham looked at me like I'd suggested we eat the furniture. My dad, phone already to his ear, just said, "Graham already called it, Cole. Just pick off what you don't want." I was 25 years old. College graduate. Working adult. Still being told to pick off the pepperoni. I laughed about it later, but in the moment, it stung more than it should have, because it was proof that nothing had changed, and probably nothing ever would. Graham got the royal treatment. I got a crash course in survival economics. And the twist? That survival course was worth more. Graham was living in a castle made of credit card debt. The kid who got nothing ended up with everything. Fast forward to about 6 months ago. My dad, Ray, retired. He'd been working at the same company for 32 years, a floor supervisor at a manufacturing plant. Good job, steady paycheck, but not the kind of thing that builds a fortune. My mom, Donna, had been working part-time at a dentist's office doing billing, but she started having problems with her knees and couldn't stand for long periods. She retired a couple of months after my dad. Here's the problem. My parents didn't plan well for retirement. They had some savings, a small pension from my dad's job, and Social Security, but it wasn't enough. Years of co-signing for Graham, helping Graham, funding Graham's lavish lifestyle, that ate into what they should have been saving. I don't think they realized how much until they sat down and actually looked at the numbers. My mom called me one evening, and I could hear it in her voice before she even said anything. That specific tone parents get when they need help, but don't want to say it directly. She said, "Cole, your father and I have been going over our finances, and things are tighter than we expected." I asked if she'd talked to Graham about it. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Graham is dealing with his own situation right now." Translation: Graham is broke. Turns out, dealing with his own situation was a generous way of saying Graham had roughly $47,000 in credit card debt, a car payment he could barely make, and an apartment lease he was locked into for another 8 months at a rent that was about 60% of his take-home pay. The king was not just broke, he was drowning. And apparently, this wasn't new. He'd been sinking for at least 2 years, but had been hiding it from everyone. My parents only found out when they asked him for help, and he finally broke down and told them everything. Let me just sit with that for a second. They went to Graham first. Of course they did. He's the king, the eldest, the one they'd invested in, the one who was supposed to lead. And when they went to their prized investment expecting a return, they found out the whole portfolio was underwater. So, they called me. The backup plan. The second choice. The kid who rides a bike and pays for his own mozzarella sticks. And look, I want to be real with you. When my mom called, there was a part of me, a small, petty, very human part that thought, so now you call Cole. Now I'm worth talking to. Now that the king's treasury is empty, the second son gets a phone call. I'm not proud of that thought, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't cross my mind. It crossed my mind, and then it sat down and stayed for a while. My mom asked if I could maybe help a little with their monthly expenses, just until they figured things out. I said I needed to think about it. She said, "Okay," and I could tell she was embarrassed. My dad got on the phone briefly and said, "We wouldn't ask if we didn't need to, Cole." That was hard to hear. Not because of the ask itself, but because I could hear in his voice that asking me, specifically me, was something he found difficult. Like going to the backup plan was an admission that the main plan had failed. And the main plan was always Graham. I took a week. I didn't stall out of spite. I stalled because I wanted to approach this the right way. This is what I do for a living. I analyze budgets. I find inefficiencies. I build plans. If my parents needed financial help, I wasn't just going to throw money at the problem. I was going to fix the problem. Think about it. They went to Graham first. The king. The man with $47,000 in credit card debt. The man whose financial plan was spend like royalty, save like it's optional. They went to him before they came to me, the literal budget analyst. The guy whose entire career is making numbers work. It's like having a flat tire, walking past a mechanic, and asking the guy doing donuts in the parking lot for help. When that didn't work, they called me like I was roadside service they forgot they had. Maybe help a little, she said. Ma'am, your firstborn is $47,000 in the hole. This is a full rescue operation, and you just dialed the only person qualified. I drove down on a Saturday, sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Graham used to decide what we ate for dinner. I brought my laptop, a notepad, and a printed spreadsheet. My mom made coffee. My dad sat across from me with that look on his face, the one where he's trying to hold on to his pride while the situation is clearly pulling it away from him. I said, before we start, I want to be clear about something. I'm going to help, but I'm going to help the way I know how. That means I need to see everything. Income, expenses, debts, all of it. And I need honesty. No hiding things, no sugarcoating. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. My dad nodded. My mom said, of course, sweetheart. So, we spent 3 hours going through their finances. 3 hours. And what I found was, well, it was what I expected, but worse. Their savings were almost depleted. My dad's pension covered about 40% of their monthly expenses. Social Security helped, but there were big gaps. They had a remaining balance on the house. They'd refinanced it years ago, partly to help pay for Graham's college, which was a fun detail to discover in real time. They had medical bills starting to accumulate because of my mom's knee issues. And they had been sending Graham money regularly, even after they retired, even while they were running out, because the king still needed his allowance. That last one almost broke me. I had to set my pen down and just breathe for a second. I sat there staring at a bank statement that showed a $500 transfer to Graham from 2 months after they retired. $500 they did not have, going to a grown man who should have been the one sending money to them. My mom saw me looking at it and said quietly, he said he needed it for rent. I didn't say anything. I just circled it in red and moved on. When we'd laid it all out, I closed my laptop and looked at them. I said, here's what I'm willing to do. I'll cover the gap in your monthly expenses, but not indefinitely. I'm going to build you a budget, a real one, and we're going to stick to it. I'll manage the payments, set up auto transfers, and review everything monthly. But there are conditions. My dad's eyebrows went up. He's not used to conditions, especially not from me. I said, first, no more money to Graham. None. Not $5, not $500. If Graham needs financial help, he comes to me, and I'll assess whether it's a genuine need or a habit. Second, I get full visibility into your accounts. I'm not going to micromanage your groceries, but I need to know where the money is going so I can keep us on track. Third, if Graham wants to be involved in this process, he's welcome, but he follows the same rules. No special treatment. The room got very quiet. My mom was looking at my dad. My dad was looking at the table. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear a neighbor's dog barking in the yard 2 houses over, the Feldman's dog. That dog has been barking since I was 12. I'm convinced it's immortal. My dad finally said, that seems fair. My mom nodded. And, just like that, for the first time in my entire life, I was the one making the decisions. I want to be honest about how that felt. It didn't feel like revenge. I know some people might read this and think I was on some kind of power trip, the overlooked kid finally getting to call the shots, but that's not what it was. It felt like, I don't know, like I was finally being seen for what I'm actually good at. My whole life, my parents looked at Graham and saw a leader. They looked at me and saw the other one. Now, they were sitting across from me asking for help. And I was the only person in the family who could actually provide it. Not because I'm smarter than Graham, but because I'd spent 31 years building the skills that being overlooked forces you to build. I set everything up over the next 2 weeks. Built a spreadsheet, obviously, it's me. Automated their bill payments. Set up a separate account for my contributions so everything was trackable. Canceled a couple of subscriptions they'd forgotten about. Found them a better rate on their car insurance by shopping around. Small things that add up. Budget analyst stuff. My mom called me after the first month and said, "Cole, this is the first time in years I haven't been stressed about money." I said, "Good. That's the job." Now, here's where it gets interesting. Graham found out. Of course, he did. My mom mentioned it, probably couldn't help herself. She told Graham that I was helping with the finances and that they'd set up a system. Graham called me that same night. He was not happy. Not even close. His voice had that edge to it, the same edge from when we were kids and I'd touched the TV remote without permission. He said, "Cole, what is this about you managing mom and dad's money?" I said, "It's exactly what it sounds like." He said, "Why wasn't I involved in this decision?" I said, "You were $47,000 in debt when they asked you for help. That's why." Long silence. He didn't have a comeback for that. Math is hard to argue with. Then he said, "So what? I have to go through you now if I need something from them." And this is the part one keep replaying. I said, "If you need money from our retired parents who are on a fixed income, yes, you come to me, and I'll tell you whether there's room in the budget." He was quiet. Then he said, "This is ridiculous. You're not in charge of this family." I said, "Nobody's in charge of the family, Graham. But somebody has to be in charge of the budget, and you're not exactly qualified." He hung up on me. Which is fine. I've been hung up on before. Not by many people, but Graham's done it at least 3 times in my life. All when he didn't get what he wanted. Pattern recognition, another useful skill from childhood. I didn't call him back. I figured he needed time. That's something I've gotten good at, giving people space, even when they don't give it to me. My buddy at work, Phil, noticed I was a little off the next day and asked what was up. I gave him the short version. He leaned back in his chair and said, "So, you're basically doing pro bono consulting for your family, and the one person who can't afford to complain is complaining?" I said, "Yeah, that about covers it." Phil shook his head and went back to his spreadsheet. Phil's a good guy. Not much for words, but he reads situations well. A couple of days later, Graham called back. Different tone, quieter. He said he'd been thinking, and I want to give him credit for this, because it clearly wasn't easy. He said, "I know I messed up my finances, and I know mom and dad spent a lot on me over the years, more than on you. I see that now." I said I appreciated him saying that. He said, "It's weird, Cole. You being the one handling this." "It's always been," he trailed off. I finished for him. "It's always been you." "I know, but it can't be right now. And honestly, Graham, it probably shouldn't have been. Not like that. We didn't have some big emotional reconciliation. This isn't a movie." But he said, "Okay." And since then, he's been, I wouldn't say cooperative, but not obstructive. He's asked me about his own finances a couple of times. Awkward conversations where the king had to sit down with his little brother and admit he didn't know how to make a budget. I helped him. Didn't gloat, didn't lecture, just sat down and showed him how to track expenses, how to prioritize debts, how to stop the bleeding. He's got a long way to go, but he started. My parents are doing better. The budget is working. My mom's been cooking more at home, and this is the part one love. She actually asks me what I want for dinner now. 31 years later, and she finally asks. My dad's been picking up some handyman work around the neighborhood, which brings in a little extra and keeps him from going stir-crazy in retirement. They seem lighter, less stressed. My mom said something last week that stuck with me. "I wish we'd asked for your help sooner, not just with the money, with everything." I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, I wish you'd asked too, about a lot of things, for a long time. The kid who spent his childhood eating whatever Graham picked is now managing the family's entire financial menu. The kid who was told Graham already chose now gets asked what he wants. I didn't blow up. Didn't throw the past in anyone's face. I showed up with a laptop and a spreadsheet and proved that the other one was the one they should have been watching all along. Sometimes, the best victory isn't loud. Sometimes it's a well-organized Excel document and a phone that rings when the king needs permission to spend. A couple of things happened in the last few weeks that feel significant. Or maybe they're small, and I'm reading too much into them. You decide. First, Graham came to my parents' house for dinner last Sunday. I was there too. We all sat at that kitchen table, and my mom had made 3 different things: a roast, a pasta dish, and a salad. She put everything out and said, "Everyone pick what you want." Nobody picked for anyone else. Graham took some of each. I took some of each. We ate. And it was weird because it was the most normal family dinner we've ever had. And the reason it felt weird was because normal was something we'd never actually experienced. Second, Graham and I went to get coffee. Just us. He didn't ask for money. He didn't complain about the budget. He actually asked me about my job. Like, genuinely asked what my day looks like, what's hard about it, what I enjoy. I told him about a project I just finished, restructuring a parks department budget that had been a mess for 3 years. He said, "That sounds really boring, but also kind of impressive." Which is maybe the most honest compliment Graham's ever given me. I'll take it. Third, and this one genuinely got me. I wasn't expecting it at all. My dad called me last Tuesday. No reason, just called. He said, "Hey, just checking in." We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing really. His handyman jobs, the weather, a show he's been watching about World War II submarines. At the end, he said, "Thanks for doing what you're doing, Cole." I know I don't say stuff like this enough. I said, "It's okay." He said, "No, it's not, but I'm trying." There's something about hearing your dad say he's trying that hits different when you're 31. Because at that age, you've mostly stopped expecting your parents to change. And when they do, even a little, it lands harder than it would have at 15 or 20. I still manage the budget, still do the monthly reviews, still get the occasional call from Graham asking if there's room in the plan for something. Last week, he asked if the budget could handle a $60 birthday gift for our mom. I said yes. He said, "Thanks." And then, "I swear this actually happened," he said, "and what do you think she'd like?" You probably know better than me. The king asked me for advice on what our mom would want. I nearly fell out of my chair. I told him she'd been wanting a new set of gardening gloves and a gift card to the nursery down the road. He said, "Perfect. Thanks, Cole." That was it. No drama, no power struggle, just a brother asking another brother for a suggestion. I should mention I also set Graham up with a basic debt repayment plan. Nothing fancy, just a spreadsheet showing his balances, minimum payments, and a prioritized payoff order, starting with the highest interest cards. I told him if he stuck with it, he could be out of the worst of it in about 3 years. He looked at the spreadsheet for a long time without saying anything and then said, "You actually enjoy this stuff, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "That's wild." Coming from Graham, that's practically a standing ovation. I don't want to oversell the transformation here. Graham's still Graham. He still has that thing where he walks into a room and sort of expects everyone to rearrange. Old habits die hard, but it's softer now. Like the volume got turned down from a 10 to about a 6. And my parents, they're still figuring out how to treat us equally after 35 years of not doing that. It's clumsy. My mom overcorrects sometimes. She'll ask my opinion on something and then immediately ask Graham's like she's keeping a tally in her head. But she's trying. They're all trying. And I guess that's all you can really ask for. I think about that kitchen table a lot. How for years it was the place where I learned that my choices didn't matter. And now it's the place where I sit with a laptop and a budget, and everyone in the family listens. Not because I demanded it, not because I threw a fit, but because I showed up prepared, steady, and ready. The way I've always been. The way nobody noticed until they had to. One last thing. I was at the grocery store last weekend, and I walked past the frozen chicken tenders. Just a regular freezer aisle moment, but I stopped and stared at them for probably too long. A woman next to me gave me a weird look. I almost explained, but decided against it. Some grudges are just too specific to explain to strangers in a grocery store. I bought the chicken tenders, by the way. Made them for dinner that night. They were fine. Actually, they were pretty good. I did them in the air fryer with some seasoning I found in the back of my cabinet. But the important thing is, I also made garlic bread and a Caesar salad and a side of roasted broccoli because nobody was there to tell me I couldn't. I ate at my own table in my own condo. Food I chose on my schedule. Simple stuff. But if you've spent your childhood without it, simple stuff feels enormous. So, here's my question for you guys. If you were in my situation, years of being the overlooked kid, and then suddenly your family needs you, would you have helped with conditions like I did, or would you have just written the checks and stayed hands-off? Part of me wonders if the conditions were too much. But the budget analyst in me knows they were absolutely necessary. What do you think?